On August 7, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a landmark decision that will be studied for generations to come, sending ripples through the legal, political, and economic landscape of the United States. In a sweeping move, the court struck down tariffs imposed during the Trump administration, tariffs that had affected billions of dollars in goods and touched nearly every corner of the American economy. This historic ruling brings to a close a years-long legal battle, one that tested the boundaries of presidential authority and the power to shape economic policy through executive action. At the heart of the case was a fundamental question. Can a president declare a national emergency over trade imbalances and use that as justification to impose sweeping tariffs without congressional approval? The Supreme Court, in a decisive opinion, said no. The decision stands as a major statement on the balance of power between the White House and Congress, reaffirming the constitutional principle that Congress holds the primary authority to regulate commerce. Businesses, foreign governments, and legal scholars around the world closely watched the case, fully aware that its outcome would shape not only American trade policy, but also global economic relationships for years to come. The court's ruling has sent shockwaves through Washington and beyond, directly impacting businesses and consumers who have faced higher prices, supply chain disruptions, and economic uncertainty as a result of the tariffs. For future presidents, this decision draws a clear and unmistakable boundary. The authority to regulate commerce, especially through tariffs, remains firmly with Congress, not the executive branch. The story behind this case stretches back to a 1977 law, fierce political debate across multiple administrations, and a determined legal challenge that brought together a coalition of businesses, lawmakers, and advocacy groups. Understanding this complex legal journey is key to grasping the full significance of today's ruling, and why it matters for the future of American democracy and economic policy. The immediate impact is clear. The decision marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the separation of powers, setting a precedent that will guide future conflicts between the branches of government. The effects of this ruling will be felt for decades to come, shaping not only the actions of future presidents and lawmakers, but also the daily lives of American families, businesses, and communities across the nation. At the center of this legal and political battle stood the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, more commonly known as IEPA. This law has become a pivotal point of debate in recent years, shaping how the United States responds to global threats. Enacted by Congress in 1977, IEPA was designed to give the president sweeping authority to address extraordinary threats to national security, such as terrorism, hostile foreign actions, or other emergencies, by declaring a national emergency and imposing economic measures, including sanctions and restrictions. Decades later, the Trump administration claimed that persistent trade deficits with other countries posed such a threat, invoking IEPA to justify imposing broad tariffs on foreign goods. This marked a significant expansion of how the law had been used in the past. However, critics quickly pushed back, arguing that Congress never intended IEPA to serve as a tool for general trade policy or to address economic competition. They insisted its purpose was to respond to specific, targeted emergencies. According to the Constitution, the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations is explicitly granted to Congress, not the president. This separation of powers is a cornerstone of American government. By using IEPA to impose long-term tariffs, critics argued, the executive branch was effectively bypassing Congress's constitutional authority and upsetting the balance of power. The central legal question emerged. Was IEPA truly meant only for targeted, short-term crises? Or could it be interpreted broadly enough to allow the president to reshape the nation's entire trade strategy for years to come? Ultimately, it fell to the courts to decide where the president's emergency powers should end and where Congress's constitutional responsibilities must begin. This was not just a technical legal issue, but a fundamental question about the separation of powers. The outcome would not only determine the fate of these controversial tariffs, but also set the stage for how future presidents and Congresses would share authority over U.S. trade policy. The Supreme Court's interpretation of IEPA would establish a precedent that could shape the balance of power between the branches of government for generations to come. The Trump administration justified the tariffs on two grounds: economic stability and national security. Officials argued that unfair trade practices had hurt American manufacturing and cost millions of jobs. Tariffs, they said, were needed to force fairer trade and protect U.S. industries. The administration also claimed that a strong industrial base was vital for national security, warning that reliance on foreign goods made the U.S. vulnerable. By invoking IEEPA, they framed trade deficits as an extraordinary threat, requiring decisive action. They argued that only the president could act quickly enough to protect the country's interests. This defense portrayed the president as a necessary guardian of American prosperity and security. Critics, however, saw this as an overreach, using emergency powers for routine economic policy. The courts would have to decide if this justification held up under the law. Opponents argued the administration's actions were a serious overreach of executive power. They claimed IEEPA was meant for urgent crises, not for managing long-term trade policy, a job for Congress. Allowing a president to declare a trade emergency, they warned, would set a dangerous precedent and bypass the constitutional process. The power to regulate foreign commerce, they argued, belongs to Congress to ensure broad consensus on major economic decisions. Critics also challenged the national security rationale, noting that tariffs on allies strained diplomatic ties and raised costs for American manufacturers. They argued the tariffs did more harm than good, undermining both the economy and national security. Ultimately, the legal challenge was about defending the constitutional order and preventing future presidents from abusing emergency powers. The courts were asked to reaffirm Congress's primary authority over trade. The legal fight over the tariffs began almost immediately after they were imposed. Businesses and importers challenged the tariffs in the Court of International Trade, arguing the president had exceeded IEEPA's authority. The government defended its actions, claiming broad presidential discretion. After initial rulings, the case moved to the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, where arguments were sharpened and closely watched. The losing side appealed to the Supreme Court, asking for a final answer on presidential power under IEEPA. Given the constitutional stakes and economic impact, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. Legal teams and outside groups prepared for a high-stakes showdown. The case became one of the most significant of the Supreme Court's term. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court struck down the tariffs as an unlawful use of IEEPA. The majority opinion declared that regulating foreign commerce is Congress's job, not the president's. The court found that trade deficits do not qualify as the extraordinary threat IEEPA was meant to address. The ruling invalidated the tariffs and ordered the government to stop collecting them. The dissent argued the president needs broad authority to respond to evolving threats, but the majority insisted on clear limits. The decision is a victory for businesses and a reassertion of congressional authority over trade. It sets a firm check on the president's use of emergency powers for economic policy. This ruling will be studied as a turning point in American constitutional law. The Supreme Court's ruling redraws the boundaries of presidential power in international trade. It makes clear that presidents cannot use emergency declarations to unilaterally impose broad tariffs. The decision puts Congress back at the center of trade policy, urging lawmakers to reclaim their constitutional role. If Congress wants to address trade imbalances, it must do so through legislation, not executive action. The ruling doesn't strip the president of all trade authority. Other laws still provide tools for targeted tariffs, but it limits the use of IEEPA for broad economic policy. The long-term effect presidents will need to work more closely with Congress on trade. This could make policy more stable but also slower and more deliberative. The decision restores traditional checks and balances in economic governance. It's a reassertion of the American system's core principles. The Supreme Court's decision will have immediate effects on the U.S. economy. Businesses that import goods now face more stability and predictability, making it easier to plan and invest. Financial markets are expected to react positively, as the removal of tariffs reduces volatility and boosts confidence. For consumers, the end of tariffs means prices for many imported goods should stabilize or even decrease. This offers relief to families squeezed by inflation. The government will need to refund billions in collected duties, a complex but welcome process for affected companies. That money can be reinvested, further stimulating the economy. The ruling removes a major source of uncertainty for businesses and markets. In short, the Supreme Court's decision is a major economic event with benefits for companies and consumers alike. The effects will ripple across the country. This Supreme Court decision is more than a ruling on tariffs. It's a defining moment for American governance, one that will echo through the halls of power for years to come. The weight of this moment cannot be overstated, as it sets a precedent that will shape the relationship between the branches of government. By drawing a clear line on emergency powers, the court reaffirmed the importance of separation of powers, ensuring that no single branch can act unchecked, even in times of crisis. This decision reinforces the foundational principle that government authority must always be balanced and accountable. The ruling challenges decades of expanding presidential authority and may prompt Congress to be more assertive in its constitutional role. Lawmakers are now encouraged to reclaim their power, engaging more actively in the legislative process and oversight. It encourages a return to policymaking through debate and compromise, not executive order. This shift could foster greater bipartisanship and more thoughtful, inclusive legislation that reflects the will of the people. Internationally, the decision signals a return to a more predictable, rules-based trade policy, helping repair diplomatic ties and reassuring allies that the United States is committed to fair and stable global relations. The case was about the character of American democracy, shared governance versus concentrated power. It asked whether the nation would continue to uphold the ideals of checks and balances or allow authority to become centralized. The court chose shared governance, reminding us that no branch is above the law and that the rule of law is the bedrock of our system. This decision reaffirms the judiciary's vital role as a guardian of constitutional order. The Constitution remains the ultimate safeguard of liberty, protecting the rights of every citizen and ensuring that power is never abused or concentrated in the hands of a few. This ruling will be remembered as a crucial moment when the judiciary preserved the balance of power, standing firm in defense of democratic principles and the enduring framework of American government. It's a powerful reminder of the enduring strength of American democracy, a system built on resilience, accountability, and the unwavering commitment to justice for all.